This is episode 607 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by Sarah Smith of Las Cruces, New Mexico. She is involved with several organizations, the Coalition of Conservatives in Action, which is a local group, New Mexico Freedom Alliance, which is a statewide organization, and the National Coalition for Health Integrity, a national organization. She can also be found on Facebook, X, and Telegram. Welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Sarah.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, we've known each other for some time, and to my knowledge, you really got engaged politically as a result of the COVID pandemic and especially government's action during the COVID pandemic in the early days, uh, but not necessarily having been active before. So, talk a little bit about who you are and what caused you to, as far as I can tell, really jump into the political debates raging in our state, in our country, and locally there in Las Cruces with both feet, because you've really been very active since COVID kicked off.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I'm a homeschooling mom. My kids now are 14 and 17. When the pandemic hit, they were 10 and 13. And it really kind of jarred me what was happening to see what was happening in New Mexico and in the country as a whole. And I really felt a sense of urgency to try to figure out what was happening, why, and how we could stop it. Because, of course, as you know, here in New Mexico, we had such extremely stringent lockdown requirements and masking requirements and vaccine mandates and all sorts of things that started rolling out that were really infringing on people's ability to live their lives and to go to work and to go to school. And, that just, to me, told me, okay, something's really wrong here and I have to get involved in this. And I actually hate politics. I'm not interested in politics. I've never been interested in politics. But what I am interested in is making sure that my kids, my grandkids, everybody else's kids have a chance to inherit something that's worth inheriting. And it feels like that's what we're on the verge of losing right now is all the legacy, all of the, wonderful things that came with our country. They're all just crumbling right now.
Yeah, and just to be totally clear, yeah, I mean, you're a homeschool mom, and those are common, and doesn't make you automatically some kind of right winger, but you definitely got engaged politically in a way that, as somebody myself who observes New Mexico's political climate very closely, I was not familiar with you until the COVID-19 pandemic. Are you, some kind of secret right winger that you were just waiting to jump into the political fray, or uh, are you, actually kind of more of a moderate in your political beliefs? That you certainly don't give off the vibe of somebody who comes from that culturally right wing
Mhm.
environment. But talk a little bit just about your own views politically and what you care,
Sure.
what drives you.
So the reason I was laughing is because just a few days ago, I found out that a very progressive organization in the state is actually calling me a right winger. They're doing a paid ad. It's about a legislature race that I actually have nothing to do with. But they're calling me out by name in there and calling me a right winger. And I think that's funny because I'm not. And I was raised Democrat. I was raised by a single mom here in New Mexico for most of my life, and was raised Democrat. And I would say probably 15 or 20 years ago, I started kind of really questioning that, but I've never been Republican. So I consider myself more of a moderate or an independent. And I really kind of fall in the middle on a lot of things. The reason that you probably heard of me during the pandemic was because I was really interested in understanding the science of what was going on. I have a background as a NASA aerospace engineer. I did that for 10 years, and I'm also a natural healthcare practitioner. So, with those two things, I was very interested in understanding what was happening, the response that was being rolled out, and whether that made any sense. And it really didn't make any sense from an epidemiological point of view. And so I actually wasn't trying to get involved in politics, but what I was trying to do was help people really look critically at what was happening and the data and what we knew to see if what was happening made sense. And so that was really how I got started and how a lot of people started finding me, just because I was talking about what was happening during the pandemic and the things that were happening in New Mexico that were not making any positive impact. So there were these huge impacts on everybody's life in terms of, not being able to do the things that they normally would do. I mean, they were even telling us for a while, don't leave the house more than a certain number of times a day, no funerals, no weddings, all these different things. But if you looked nationwide, we weren't doing any better than anywhere else. We ended up with the fifth highest COVID death rate in New Mexico. And you compare that to other states that were wide open, and we really had no benefits from those crazy policies. So that's kind of what got me going and really getting involved because, as a natural healthcare practitioner, I have treated vaccine injured children before. I've, consulted with people who are struggling with issues related to things coming from the pharmaceutical industry. And to watch what was happening in this state where they were literally paying students $100 to take a shot at school for an illness that didn't even affect children. I mean, it was just nuts. And so a lot of people were really struggling with these vaccine mandates and mask mandates. I had a lot of teachers and federal employees and all kinds of different people contacting me saying, what do I do? How do I deal with this? I'm going to lose my job. And here in Doña County, we had the first vaccine mandate in the country, which was for all the first responders here in Doña County. And so the firefighters, the EMTs, a lot of them that didn't want to take that shot for their own specific reasons were being threatened with being fired. And, when I talked to a mom, she was a pregnant lady who was working in the detention center here. And she said, I can get fired if I don't take this shot, but I'm really worried about my baby because I'm pregnant. And that's just heartbreaking and absolutely wrong that she should be put in that position where she has to make that choice. You can have a job, you can have a livelihood, or you can potentially put your baby at risk with something that's unknown at that point. So I don't know if that gives you kind of a background, but those are the things that really were pulling on my heart. And seeing all of these kids and parents who are struggling with the school closure situation, kids being forced to wear masks at school and suffering all kinds of different issues, whether social issues, asthma, passing out, kids throwing up. All these things were happening in the schools and nobody was willing to even talk about it.
Well, first and foremost, I applaud you for engaging because, as I mentioned at the outset, you were, are a homeschool mom, and you're not really affected in the same way as kids were in New Mexico classrooms as a homeschooler. And my family made the decision during the pandemic for that school year from the fall of 2020 to the spring of 2021, indeed, to homeschool. My kids then wanted to go back to a traditional school setting, although not a public or government school setting. But as somebody who's homeschooling, you could probably more easily get by unimpeded by the policymakers, unimpeded by Michelle Lujan Grisham than quite a number of other families were able to. And obviously, it's had devastating impacts on those families. But the vaccine mandate is certainly an issue, and I know medical freedom is a critical issue for you. But as a homeschool mom, was it just seeing the harms of the lockdowns, that the way it was impacting other kids? Was it any specific trigger item that really caused you to get active, or what happened?
Well, I guess there's a little bit more of a backstory there in terms of I had read a book probably, I'll say 5 years before the pandemic, that was called The Fourth Turning. And it was written by a couple of historians who were looking at the cycles of history and what happens over time, over thousands of years. This cycle that repeats, where every 80 to 100 years, there is a big time of crisis. And that the outcome of that crisis that happens every to 80, 100 years sets the tone for the next few generations after that. And so I had read that book before. They talked about, the previous time the big crisis happened was the World War II era. And they were predicting that something was going to happen around 2020 to 2025 in that book. And that book was written in the 90s. And as soon as the pandemic started happening, I just realized, oh no, they were right. We can't avoid this crisis. We can't avoid this cycle that's been happening for thousands of years. It's happening again right now. And so I knew from reading that book and studying on it that the outcome of this crisis really is going to set the tone for the next 80 years. And that really drove me to want to get involved as soon as I saw what was happening in New Mexico. And you're right, being a homeschooler and being someone who works on my own, I don't have a boss, I didn't necessarily have a lot of the impacts that some people had in the state from the mandates. I did, though, still have some impacts. My kids did too. I personally, for whatever reason, if I try to wear a mask, I get dizzy, especially if I'm hot. I almost passed out in the grocery store. And dealing with then for several years, this issue of I can't go grocery shopping without potentially passing out or getting screamed at. And I had random strangers screaming at me in the store, "You're too stupid to live." Somebody told me that, screamed it at me right in front of my daughter. And this is just nuts. And that's really the kind of culture that Michelle Lujan Grisham instilled in the state by the way she did everything, the way she had her snitch hotline set up where people could call and report on each other, and, trying to charge fines of $100 if people were seen outside going for a walk without a mask on. This stuff was just so nuts. And of course, looking at the impacts on the kids, and one of my main focuses has always been the kids, whether that's educating, I have my own natural healthcare blog and teaching people how to homeschool. And then also my natural healthcare practice where I treat children. Children's health is super important to me, and seeing what they were doing, whether it was my kids being affected or somebody else's, I just couldn't be quiet at that point.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I think we fairly quickly found each other in cyberspace, and knew that we were allies and working in the same direction to reopen New Mexico, reopen the schools, the economy, stop some of the fear mongering, vaccine mandates, all those kinds of things during COVID. But we're here, we are, and we're still feeling the after effects of COVID, and you are definitely feeling the after effects because your calendar is probably a lot more full nowadays, at least of political events, than it was before. So let's briefly run through each of the organizations you're engaged with, and talk about maybe briefly if or how people can get involved if they're inclined. So first is we'll start with the local Coalition of Conservatives in Action. Now, you already said that you don't view yourself as a conservative but a moderate, but this is kind of what I would imagine is the kind of local Las Cruces / Doña Ana County activism group on behalf of limited government, but also you mentioned the harms of trans indoctrination and affirmation in New Mexico schools. So what does the Coalition of Conservatives in Action do, and what issues are they focusing on these days?
Yeah, so it is a local group, like you said, mostly focused on issues right here in Las Cruces. And so I'm the vice chair for this group. The leader is Juan Garcia, and it's a community group that's really looking at how we can turn things around in Las Cruces. Over the last 5 years, we have seen a tremendous increase in crime and homelessness in Las Cruces, and it's really a dramatic difference what we have seen during that time frame. And so we're trying to really understand what's causing this and how we can try to advocate for effective solutions. Here in Las Cruces, we're in a little bit different situation than you in Albuquerque, whereas we have very progressive people in pretty much all the elected positions in Las Cruces. There's, I can think of one exception, but our school board, our city council, everybody, they're all Democrats. And I mean, there's Democrats and then there's progressives, right? And I do think there's a big difference there. Like you said, I consider myself moderate, but as the as the progressives move further and further to the left, that actually shifts me towards looking like a conservative because
Right.
things have just gotten so extreme. And so there are a lot of policies being pushed here in Las Cruces. Like, for instance, they rolled out universal basic income. That's a pilot project that they're doing here right now, giving people $500 a month for 18 months. There are a lot of programs for homelessness that don't seem to actually help the community as a whole. They're basically focusing on housing instead of focusing on rehabilitating. And that's causing huge problems. I mean, they dropped a homeless housing project in the middle of a neighborhood here. It's called Desert Hope on the corner of Foster and Pecos here in Las Cruces. And it has totally devastated the community because there's so much crime and drugs happening there. They've even had drug dealers housed in that project, and it was partially funded by the city. So, these are the kinds of issues that we're trying to figure out how we can redirect and encourage better solutions to be implemented. The school board is another place that we do a lot of advocacy. And as you mentioned, so across the state of New Mexico and really across the country, there are a lot of issues going on with transgenderism being affirmed in schools. And I'm not anti-LGBTQ, but I am pro-children's health. And all of the medical interventions that go along with that have potential risks and problems, including sterilization, including heart problems, blood clots. And so encouraging children to take those steps when they're still really young makes no sense when we know that 4 out of 5 children are going to grow out of it. I mean, that is known at this point. So I have a real problem with the schools enabling that kind of affirmation to happen, through asking pronouns and whatever different things they're doing, as well as our state laws last year that, as you know, the governor signed into law the bill that allows transgender or abortion care for children with no parental consent or notification. And it even fines teachers and nurses $5,000 if they in any way interfere with access to that care. So I have a huge problem with that. It's really an attack on children's health. And it's actually an attack on the gay community because when you actually look and see which kids are identifying as transgender, most of them end up being autistic, having mental health problems, or gay. And so those are the communities that are going to really be suffering the brunt of all the long-term negative problems from that transgender healthcare in the long run.
So before we move on to your next involvement, well, two things. One is if people want to find out more or get involved in the Coalition of Conservatives in Action, how do they do that? And secondly, what's your take on why things have moved the way they have in Las Cruces? You're right. Albuquerque, while the state representatives and the legislators from Albuquerque now are almost exclusively Democrats, uh, we have not seen kind of the local, we've had this kind of conflict between progressive Mayor Keller and a more moderate city council. It's certainly not as exclusively uh, progressive as Las Cruces, although my understanding of Mayor Miyagishima, and the current Eric Enriquez is his name, I think. Anyway, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Not everybody in Las Cruces elected politics are progressive, but certainly it seems like they have really taken over. So one is involvement, and two is kind of your analysis of why things have gone the way they have in recent years in Las Cruces.
Sure. So the Coalition of Conservatives in Action, we have our website. It's conservativesinaction.org. And we also have weekly meetings. Every Thursday, we have a public meeting. We have a lot of different speakers come to our meetings. Like this week, for instance, we're going to have a meeting with the district attorney here so people can understand more what's going on. We really try to educate the community and give them a chance to understand what's going on, and learn how to get involved. Um, as far as why things have gone how they have in Las Cruces, I don't really know. I do know that it seems that a lot of voters in Las Cruces are just straight party ticket voters that just vote Democrat on everything all the time, without really giving it any thought. And I think that's, one of the big issues. But there's also, if I look at the people who have been elected here, a lot of them are Emerge trained, which, that's an organization that is purposely trying to push women into Democrat roles in government. And many of our city councilors, our school board members, our state reps are Emerge trained. And, I don't know how much of it is being targeted for Las Cruces specifically. I don't really know why Las Cruces is so much more progressive than Albuquerque. But at the same time, I can see that there are a lot of people who are very unhappy with what's happening right now. And we had an officer get murdered, a police officer, just a couple months ago here in Las Cruces by a vagrant. And that has really woken up the community a lot. I'm seeing a lot more action right now. There's a business group that has popped up as well. And a lot of people right now are trying to figure out how we can change things. And it really feels like we have the opportunity right now, sad as it is that it came in the wake of a death. But it seems like we have the opportunity to potentially get things moving in a different direction. So I'm hopeful.
And I will be speaking to your group on June 20th. So if folks are in the area and they want to check out a meeting, I will be down there talking about some of the issues that we work on at your meeting. So I appreciate the fact that it's not easily understandable as to why exactly things are going the way they're going politically, and there's always the next election. So um, folks can always change that. And I see from your website that you've had some recent events with people running from the legislature and folks involved, and definitely a lot of information at the conservativesinaction.org website. So great stuff there. And you're on Facebook, X, Twitter, YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. So, all
Mhm.
right, let's move on to the uh, New Mexico Freedoms Alliance. Now, this is statewide, and this is something that I think it's safe to say I really associate with you, Sarah Smith, as being the prime mover behind this organization. But am I wrong in that? If I'm not wrong, just explain what the group is all about.
Yeah, well, the executive committee for New Mexico Freedoms Alliance is me, along with Melanie Rubin and Karen LeRae. And Melanie and Karen are both in Albuquerque, and I'm down here in Las Cruces. And this organization was started late in 2020. And it wasn't started by us, actually. It was started by another guy named Christopher Hassel, and he kind of turned it over to us. But the the main goal with New Mexico Freedoms Alliance was to help grassroots leaders around the state in all the different cities get connected with each other so that we could work together, we could collaborate, we could share lessons learned, we could take coordinated actions. So, during the pandemic, we were doing a lot as far as organizing statewide protests against school masks and school closures and lockdowns and things like that, and vaccine mandates. And then since then, you know, since we've kind of moved beyond that, at this point, New Mexico Freedoms Alliance is still very involved in terms of helping leaders share what's going on in different places and kind of work and build off of each other's progress. One of the things that group has that I've been really involved with is a New Mexico teachers group. And this is a group of over 200 teachers across the state who, originally came together because of the mandates that they were being forced. They were being forced. They had vaccine mandates for all the teachers in the schools, the mask mandates, et cetera. So that was a framework under which we built this network. But we've continued on because there are so many problems going on in New Mexico schools. And so we just had a meeting last night with this group. And, the teachers around the state are super concerned about what's happening, whether that's the transgender ideology that's being pushed or the also, I would say non-controversial things that are happening that are making outcomes for students so poor here. Here in Las Cruces, if I look at the proficiencies of our high schools, Mayfield High School here has a 6% math proficiency. Six, not 16, not 20. 6% of students are proficient in math and 30 something percent for reading. And that's just one of them. All the schools here are bad. I've looked, the ones in Albuquerque are generally pretty bad too. Of course, New Mexico is rated 50th in the nation for education. But there are a lot of things that are happening in the schools that are making us fail, like the social promotion, where the kids are basically allowed to pass from grade to grade, whether they know material or not. And that really hijacks the whole system because then the teachers have such a problem trying to deal with the students who don't even know what they needed to know to enter that class, that the whole thing really just falls apart. And of course, they still graduate, which makes no sense. So anyway, that's kind of in the nutshell what New Mexico Freedoms Alliance is working on. And it's a private member association, the New Mexico Freedoms Alliance is. And we send out calls to action. We do a lot of work during the legislative session as well to help people understand what's happening and get involved in, pushing back against or for bills that would be really beneficial for New Mexico. So that's kind of our purview.
Yeah, that's quite a bit, and that's nmfa.us, and
Mm-hmm.
folks can find out more about that organization. Obviously, Rio Grande Foundation also very involved in the education sphere and reforming that specific area of our state, which uh, it's just unbelievable that if almost any other state was dead last in education, just as a rule, uh, parents and families would be out in the streets. And I know you guys are doing the best you can to get people active and get change, but man, it's pretty unbelievable how terrible our education system. And really, it comes down to your option, which is homeschooling, or finding other educational options and paying for those outside of the government school situation, which continues to suck in resources and put out unprepared students and students leaving the system.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so nationally here, the National Coalition for Health Integrity. What's that all about?
Yeah, so that is an outreach group that we started. The New Mexico Freedoms Alliance started this group. I think it was actually Melanie, it was her kind of brainchild, that we wanted to find a way for grassroots leaders around the country to have collaboration and share resources and do coordinated actions. And so we started this a few years ago, and we've had actions with, up to over 20 states participating at the same time. A lot of the focus with the National Coalition for Health Integrity has been educating people about different things that are going on. So for instance, during the pandemic, we were trying to make sure that parents were educated about the risks of the vaccines as well as the non-risks of the illness for children, because there was so much pressure being applied for parents to be, giving these injections even to infants. And so we had some coordinated countrywide efforts. Actually, one of those, we even had a few international partners, some people in Canada and the UK were also participating, and Mexico. And then more recently, we've been trying to help people become more educated and informed about the transgender issue and about what's happening in the schools, how it's being pushed in the schools, how, certain areas are hiding the information from the parents like they are in Albuquerque, so that the parents will have a chance, hopefully, to initiate those conversations and be prepared to know how to deal with this. I had a parent who was up in northern New Mexico was just telling me a couple weeks ago that his son, who attends a middle school in a public school in New Mexico, the teacher was asking his son if he thought maybe he was a girl. And there was really no reason for the teacher to even be asking his son this. But, these are the kinds of things where if the parents don't have open conversation with the kids about it, the kids aren't going to know to tell their parents about it, or they're not going to feel like it's safe, especially because on this issue in particular, the school system is essentially teaching the kids that their parents can't be trusted, that, just talk to us about it. We'll take care of you. Your parents aren't going to support you. So this is an issue that's really near and dear to my heart as far as trying to help make sure that kids are able to grow up healthy. And the New Mexico Freedoms Alliance, we're actually going to be hosting a detransitioner panel, not hosting, we're co-sponsoring along with Partners for Ethical Care. And that's going to be in Santa Fe, June 18th. There's going to be detransitioners coming in to talk about their experience because a lot of people really don't understand what's happening, how many people are kind of getting funneled into this transgender healthcare path and then regretting it immensely, when it's so late, they've already had a double mastectomy, different things, body changes that they can't undo. So that's one of the big issues that the National Coalition's been working on, as well as New Mexico Freedoms Alliance.
Interesting. Well, one of the issues that we talked about in preparation for this event or this show was homelessness and crime issues. Unless you spend a lot of time in Las Cruces or Doña Ana County, you may not be familiar with what's going on. And I'm quite frankly not familiar. We see these issues running rampant here in Albuquerque. Uh, in Las Cruces, you have I-25, you have I-10, so you have major roads. Of course, you have warm weather, et cetera, and that makes things more attractive than, say, being in Chicago for a lot of homeless folks. But talk about what's going on currently with homelessness and crime issues. And as an aside, I guess uh, the border is another big issue in kind of the southern part of New Mexico and Texas and whatnot. Is the border associated with much of this, or is this just kind of your own issues that you're dealing with in Las Cruces?
Yeah, we are very close to the border. It's about 30 miles from here. So as far as people coming across the border, Las Cruces isn't really a stopping point so much for people who are coming into the country. They generally go through Las Cruces. I would say that the biggest issue we have with the border situation is the drugs that are coming in. So we have so much fentanyl coming into our community, and that feeds into all these other issues that we're seeing with the homelessness and with the crime. I did a public records request a little while ago to see who the top repeat offenders were in Las Cruces. And it was just shocking when you actually looked at the data to see that there were these people who were listing the homeless housing project as their address. So they're homeless and they are committing so many crimes in this community over and over and over again and being released. The catch and release thing here has been insane. The police officers have said they can still be filling out the paperwork and the guy's already being released out the front door. And so those issues are really compounded because what do the police even do at that point? It becomes this bizarre thing where people are like, well, there's no point in even calling the police. And I can only assume for the police, it has to feel just totally demoralizing. What's the point of it? Um, and then you have so many businesses and homeowners and just people being affected by the crime. So we've had a huge increase in property crime, a huge increase in vehicle thefts and violent crime. So all of those have been increasing a lot over the last few years. And I'm not saying it's all homeless people who are doing this, but a lot of the crime is coming from people who are on drugs, having mental health issues, whatever, who do end up in that situation. And our criminal justice system here is not handling it adequately. Now, we did just recently get a new judge, and we're hoping that's going to change some things. Another thing is we really need competency on a statewide level to be addressed in order for us to be able to change some of the situation here because we don't have a good way to get people into the help that they need down here in Las Cruces. And so I'm hoping that that's something that's going to get addressed during the special session. I don't know. We're often disappointed with what can happen during the legislature, but that's one thing that I'm really hoping we'll see a change with.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that in Albuquerque, there's a lot of frustration with the mayor and the police administration. And some of that, at least, is perceived to result from the Department of Justice and their joint agreement that they've had with the city for a decade. Are you seeing the political leadership of Las Cruces kind of not taking homelessness seriously and the crime associated with it? Are they taking it seriously, just being overwhelmed? What is kind of the status down there?
Well, for the last couple years, it has really felt like they were not willing to actually see it. However, because of the fact that that officer got murdered a couple months ago, it does feel like some of our city leadership is actually seeing the problem now and willing to consider that the solutions they were putting in place weren't actually working. So I'm really hoping that's going to change. But yeah, we have, and we do still have, there are still some people in leadership here who they seem to really see the perpetrators of the crimes as victims. They say, oh, it's their trauma, it's their, all these reasons that people are committing crimes. But at the end of the day, that you have to deal with it. I mean, you can't just let them continue to do what they're doing and destroying the community and, scaring people. Somebody was beheaded in a park here. you know, I, it's it's really nuts. And my kids, they ride the city bus, and they attend some classes in the downtown area, and they have seen so much with people who are on drugs, people doing drugs in the open, smoking crack, doing fentanyl, whatever, right in front of their classroom, right outside the window where kids are watching them. And, it's these things can't continue. Many families don't feel like it's safe to even go to parks or go out, and that really has to change. And of course, that depends on the part of town you're in, and all these different things. But it shouldn't be like this, and it wasn't like this a few years ago.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. All right, well, we are coming to the end of our time together here, Sarah. So, are there any issues or anything that you want to talk about that we haven't had a chance to discuss during our conversation?
My main takeaway is that everybody needs to get as involved as they possibly can right now, because everything's falling apart. The more you start to actually peel back the layers and look, the more you see the problems that are there. And so, there are different community groups that people can get involved in. They can get involved by watching what the legislature is doing, through what you're doing at Rio Grande Foundation, through New Mexico Freedoms Alliance. But we need as many people as possible to be paying attention, to actually take action. And we do, as well as you, try to make it as easy as possible for people to know how to take action. So get connected, get involved. This is not the time to just sit and wait and hope that somebody else is going to deal with it.
Yeah, and obviously, early voting is on right now for legislative races for folks. Well, I mean, there's other races, but predominantly at the statewide level, those legislative primaries are very critical. Do get out and votes in those primaries, especially if you have contested primaries going on in your area, but make sure you just get out to vote. And then, of course, in November, it's extremely critical that folks get out to vote in November. And, getting engaged with an organization like Sarah's between now and then is also critical as well. And the good news is she has a menu there, local coalition of conservatives in action in Las Cruces, Doña Ana County, New Mexico Freedoms Alliance statewide, and the National Coalition for Health Integrity, again, a national organization. So, Sarah, thank you so much for your time. It is always good to chat with you and see you at different events and catch up. And I know I'll be speaking to your group here on the 20th of June and look forward to catching up with you again then.
Thanks so much, Paul. I look forward to seeing you here in a few weeks.
All right. Take care. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.